You know, one of the main record companies that the Two Live Crew was originally on, it was Macola Records. And Macola Records is a very famous record label out of LA. Dr. Dre was on Macola Records. You name it, Snoop Dogg was on Macola Records, Two Live Crew. Every top artist in LA was on Macola Records, and he was basically doing everybody the same way, pretty much bad. So, you know, to make a long story short, these guys came and said, hey, look, we want to get off this record label. We need you to get into the music business. And I did not want to be in the record business. So at the end of the day, I said, okay, I'll help these guys. And I went around to the local record labels in Miami. Betty Wright was on a label. Henry Stone, no, we don't want no rap. Every other door I went in, no, we don't want no rap. So at the end of the day, I said, hey, look, I believe in this. You know, I believe in this music. And to be real with you, Two Live Crew, if you go back into the history, they were the first conscious group before it was Common, before it was anybody else, because on the flip side, it was a guy named Yuri Vilot, and he did a song called Revolution. If you find the first Two Live Crew record, you'll hear him talking about everything that Common talks about right now. So I then said, you know, to the guys in the group, hey, look, it's gonna be very hard to compete against the Run DMCs and all these guys of the world. You know, music coming from out of Miami has to be a little different. It has to be like Miami. I don't get involved in anything that's not original. So at the end of the day, you know, me and Mr. Mix, the producer, we said, hey, look, we gotta make this music a little different. And so I said, okay, I like Leroy Skillet. I like Unesta. And he said, I like Unesta and Leroy Skillet. And then he said, I like Dolomite. And I said, I like Millie Jackson. And, you know, these are the things that we were listening to the houses at our house when our mom would go to work and dad. So we ended up coming up with an idea, we're gonna make some funny rap music. We're gonna make some funny music. So we would take the samples while everybody else was sampling James Brown and everything else, we would take those samples and put it on those records. So when you hear the explicit lyrics of the Two Live Crew, it really came from what Dolomite was doing, what Unesta was doing, and what Leroy Skillet was doing. So our intent was to make the music funny. So, you know, we were young guys and we wanted to do something funny and just shock people. So we did that and we made the record Throw the D. And at the time, there were most of the rap artists, you always had to do an answer to the song. So, you know, we did Throw the D and that was a big success. So we had to do Throw the P. So I went and got my nieces who never rapped in their life, you know, they ended up doing the Throw the P. So while all this was going on, I had, you know, some folks in Mobile, Alabama, you know, PTA, you know, president sent us a letter and said, look, you know, the kids are getting this dirty song, this Throw the D song, because at that time it had no clean version to it. So I said, okay, well, this is not, we don't intend this to get to the kids. We don't want the kids to get the dirty version of the song. I then went in and said, okay, let's figure out what we could do, because now you got to keep in mind, I'm the artist, I'm one of the artists, and I am the record company. You know, because here we are in Miami with no record label. This wasn't a record label that was affiliated with any company in New York or California, anything like that. This was in my wash house, at my 2-bedroom house where my mother lived. We were cooking up the records in there and we had to make all the decisions at that time. And me being the businessman, I had to then figure out, okay, how do we not let kids listen to this music? So at the end of the day, I then, you know, started thinking about it and I said, okay, well, what do they do in the movie industry? In the movie industry, they have, you know, the parental advisory, 17 years old, you know, you can't look at certain movies. So I then took that idea, incorporated it into the music business, and I created that sticker, what you see right now on the labels, on the records. That parental advisory sticker, we pretty much created that sticker in the bedroom. You know, and said, look, we got to put this on there, and then at the end of the day, I then called the lady back the young lady at the PTA and said, look, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna put a sticker on the music. I'm gonna have the little staff that I have. At that time, we were calling record stores. We're gonna have these little staff call the record stores and say, look, let's treat this like beer. Do not sell the sticker album to the kids, but sell the sticker album to the adults. Sell the clean one, the unstickered one, to the kids. So now we're being upfront, and we're doing the right thing, because at the end of the day, it wasn't intended for kids. So now you have this whole Al Gore, typical Gore, everybody now is focused on the family. Now they could grab a hold of the records, and before you know it, we're sitting on the news, the nightly news. Then you have Dan Quayle. He mentions it, the Vice President of the United States at that time, 2 Live Crew gotta go. These lyrics, then the governor from the state of Florida. Now it takes on a whole other life of its own, and we're sitting there saying, this was never the intent. We were just having fun. We were just partying. We were just making records, and we did something to prevent this. Then you had Camelots, big record chains in Walmart, saying, if you have, this was the most interesting part of it all, if you have a clean version and a dirty version, then we're not going to take either version. So that was amazing. I'm like, I don't get this. We're trying to be proactive and not allow this product to get to these kids. So we had to make other decisions. But at the time, like I say, the company got bigger. I then started adding more artists onto the label. Artists like H-Town, you probably heard the song Knocking the Boots. Then I ended up adding other artists on, whether it was Lorenzo. Then I would come to New Orleans a lot, and I said, well, being that we're the only Southern hip hop label and we're the first, I would come to New Orleans a lot and say, and New Orleans had its own sound. Texas had its own sound. Heard this kid named Bust Down out of New Orleans, signed him up. He ended up selling hundreds of thousands of records. So okay, we gotta be a little more versatile with the record company. Sign up R&B artists, went to Texas, Houston, found the group H-Town. That name was originally the Jits, and I was like, well, that don't sound cool. I can't put a Jits on the label. So I didn't give him the name H-Town because, I would hear the DJ Greg Street, who's a friend of mine now, he's in Atlanta, and he would always say H-Town, H-Town, H-Town. And I was like, that's the name of y'all group. Y'all gonna represent y'all city. So we ended up signing those guys, going on with the music, with the company, getting into, now we wanna make this company bigger. I ended up doing a deal with Atlantic Records, probably, the first deal that I ever done with a major label, because now my company has gotten bigger. I was selling, we put the company in a warehouse, from one warehouse to the next warehouse, because it was getting bigger and bigger. So I said, look, I need to put this big machine behind this company. So we ended up doing a deal with Atlantic Records. That was for a short period of time. That didn't really work out. Then I ended up doing another deal with a record company called Sony Relativity. That was the same label NWA was on. With my deal with Sony Relativity, I didn't know at the time they were trying to do a hostile takeover of my entire company, which they eventually ended up doing. I had all these artists on there from the H-Town selling platinum, the first independent platinum album, my album selling platinum, 2 Live Crew, you name it, everything that we touched sold either gold or platinum. So I ended up, at the time, I ended up saying I'm not gonna let them do a hostile takeover, and somebody gave me this ideal of Chapter 11. The difference between, they explained to me the difference between Chapter 11 and Chapter 7. And I said, okay, well, before I let them do me like they did most of these other companies and these other guys and take over their business, I'll do Chapter 11 and reverse their contract to get out of my contract in order to get into a new contract, so it won't be this hostile takeover. So I ended up doing the Chapter 11, getting out of that contract, and then starting a new contract, and that's how I ended up with Island Records, and that's where the song Scarred. Then I discovered Trick Daddy through that next deal, and then after the deal with Island Records, then I discovered Pitbull.